My name is Patrick. Not, I don't live at the bottom of the sea, or I have a friend that's a sponge. But my last name is Thompson, and I actually do live here in Marietta. Born and raised here in Marietta. We've lived in a couple different places, Chicago and Birmingham, and some different areas. But we've been back here in Marietta since about 2001. I have my wife and I have been married. We're getting ready in about 2 weeks to celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary. And thank you. God has definitely blessed me with an incredible wife. We have also 2 children. PJ is in 9th grade, Natalie is in 7th. And for many years I did youth ministry in local church. And now I'm getting to be a youth minister to my children. And that's a whole different ball game when it's your children versus somebody else. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be with you guys today, a pleasure to worship with you. And God's already just blessed me by being in your presence and in his presence today. Let me just tell you a little bit about what's going on in my life. And anytime I get an opportunity to speak lately, I tell you people about how God has been just changing and riveting my life for his purposes. About coming up on 8 months ago now, God really began a transition in our family's life to say, what's next? We had kind of been doing, great things, enjoying where God was leading us, but we really came to this point and some things changed in our life, and we just got to a point where we said, God, what's next? We're open to whatever you have for us. And I learned at that moment, don't pray that prayer and don't say that to God unless you are willing for him to answer it in a very unique and special way. And God began to do that in our lives. And here's what it boils down to. In about 4 months, our family will be relocating to New York City to plant a church right off of Manhattan, right into Queens, into an area that is really devoid of the gospel. And you go, how does a guy who is from Marietta, who is from the South, how does he end up with a calling to plant a church in New York City? And it really all began a couple years ago. I had an opportunity 2 summers ago to go up to New York and be a part of a team who did work with a church up there, doing vacation Bible school and some other mission stuff. And it's the first time I'd been to the city in a long time. I went as a kid. I mean, like probably 7, 8 years old. All I remember is seeing a bum on the side of the street. That's really all I remember from that trip, and just the craziness of looking around and seeing buildings that I thought, wow, we built things this tall. And I remember coming in last couple summers ago, and I'd actually just come. It was a Sunday afternoon. had just preached at a church, and I'm thankful that I get to dress like this in your church, the church I preached in. That Sunday I was not as fortunate, and so I, coat and tie, and I get on the plane, at least have a chance to take my tie off. And my friends that I'm meeting up there, when they picked me up from the airport, they're like, we want to go down to Times Square right now. And I was like, can we at least go to the hotel? Let me change clothes. They were like, well, it's that direction, and Times Square is this direction. I'm like, all right, that's fine, we'll go. So I'm in my suit, no tie, but loafers, everything, we're walking down Times Square. Let me tell you, do not walk down Times Square dressed up like that, because you attract a crowd immediately. I was amazed as I was walking down. People began to come up to me and ask me for handouts. Hey, do you have this? And one in particular, I remember, a guy walked up to me and he said, excuse me, sir, can you spare 100? And I literally stopped at that point. I turned to him and said, 100? He said, yeah, I just need it to get through the day. I said, I do too. I said, can you make change, or what do you got? I was like, there's a whole different level of need in New York City. And so we had a great opportunity to minister that week. And really, I came home that week enjoying the time God had given me there. But I really didn't think, hey, God's going to do anything with us up there. The next summer, so about a year ago, for our kid's 13th birthday, we do a thing for them. And I was talking to JD, and they kind of do this for their 10-year-old grandchild's birthday. But for their 13th birthday, we let our kids pick anywhere they'd like to go in the U.S. And in doing that, we asked them to pick 2 things: a place that they would like to see that they haven't seen before, but a place that we could also go and serve and minister. And so we go and have fun, but we also go and minister as well. And so PJ, my son, and I got to spend last summer a week in New York City, and we did everything from the Statue of Liberty to the Empire State Building to working with the church, feeding the homeless and ministering to those less fortunate than us. And I'm telling you, I walked away from that week and thinking about all the different things that describe New York City. Right, the Big Apple, the Empire State, just where the world comes together, this incredible melting pot of people. But I really went away with one burning word that described New York City, and that word is lost. That the people of that city are lost, and they don't experience the love of God like you and I have already here this morning. And it's a place that's almost devoid of the gospel. And God really helped me fall in love with that city and helped our family begin to fall in love with that city last year. And then has just used an incredible journey over these last few months to say about January 10th is when we're relocating to New York. And so just ask you to keep us in your prayers as you do that, our family. And God's already answered some tremendous prayers. But one of the unique things, and we're on us to land in Scripture this morning, is in James 5. And James 5 is a great passage. It's been challenging me to think about how do we communicate the gospel in a place like New York City. Because let me just tell you something. Yeah, New York City is different, but it's not that different than here. There are lost people walking around this town, lost people walking around Marietta, lost people walking around your neighborhood who are devoid of the gospel, who are not engaging in the gospel. And James was telling here, James is actually writing to what's known as a pre-Christian culture. Christ had come, Christ had been buried, resurrected, and has ascended into heaven, but yet it's not like his influence has impacted the entire church and the entire world at that point. And so James is writing this letter to the Jews that are in Jerusalem, and because here's what they're trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out, how does Jesus fit into our system? All right, we've got the law, we've got all these practices we do. Now Jesus came, he was a good guy. How does he fit into our system? And here's what James is saying. He doesn't. He does not fit into our system. He's something brand new. He's something completely different. And so he was writing this pre-Christian culture. Well, guess what we're living in? We're not living in a pre-Christian culture. We're almost living in a post-Christian culture now, where the influence of Christ is not as strong and as evident as it used to be. When I'm in New York and we engage in conversations with people about God, and I've learned not to start with Christ because they don't understand who Christ is at that point, many of them. So I start with trying to help them understand who God is, who the God of the Bible is, and I'll say just a simple question like, tell me how you view God. And here's the vast majority of the answers I get. Which God are you talking about? Because they have a friend who's a Hindu, they have a friend who's a Buddhist, they have a friend who's a Muslim, they have a friend who's Jewish or Catholic or whatever, and they go, which one of those gods are you talking about? And our world is kind of picking and choosing the things we like about different religions and things like that, and kind of putting it together and creating our own system. And so the word of James here in chapter 5 is just as relevant to us because it's dealing with us engaging with a culture that doesn't know how Christ fits in. And we've got to be able to communicate the fact that it's not Christ plus or Christ and, it is simply being able to trust Christ completely. And that word I just used is a key word. It's trust. Right? Trust. That's what James boils down to here. It's a matter of trust. Is Christ worthy of our trust? Because if he is, if we can honestly trust him, then the claims he makes are radical and life-changing for us. If he is worthy of our trust, then it will change our lives if we put our trust in him. Not just believe things about him, but trust him. You see what trust does? Trust always leads to submission. Trust, just saying I believe something, is different than trusting. When I trust, I end up submitting my life to what I trust. I trust my wife. I trust my parents. I trust certain people. I trust circumstances in my life. And when I do that, I'm willing to submit. Most of all, I trust Christ. And in doing that, I'm willing to submit to his commands, his desires, and his hopes for my life. Trust is a difficult thing to build, isn't it? I don't build things well. I don't work good with my hands. My brother got that skill. He He was in college. He was a landscape architect. He's in ministry is now as well. But Jay, my brother, you throw him like 3 pieces of 2x4 out there and a hammer, and he'll walk in here with like this, 4-story birdhouse that he built out of that. You give it to me, and I'll walk back in here with 3 pieces of board and a hammer and say, what am I supposed to do with this? Growing up, I took shop when I was in middle school, 7th grade. I remember it because I hated it, because I was not good at it. And we were supposed to build a toolbox for our dad for Father's Day. What I walked out of with that class was a box that barely hung on. I mean, the hinges were coming apart. And when I handed it to my dad, he did the dad thing. It was like, oh, thank you. But I could tell he was trying to figure out, what is this? What am I supposed to do with this? I'm just not good with my hands. Time growing up, we had some neighbors that we just played with all the time. We thought it'd be fun to build a tree house, and they should have never got me involved in that project. And we're building a tree house. We're putting wood up and leaning things together, and we spent a couple days doing this. And we decide, hey, we're done. Let's spend the night in it tonight. And so we get up in there, and it's all right. Everything's going good till about 2 o'clock in the morning. And we wake up to this thing crashing down. I'm hitting limbs and things like that. And as I'm hitting limbs, I'm thinking, probably would have been good to use some nails at some point along the way. I'm not good at building things with my hands. But trust is something that we've got to build, and it's not with our hands. It's with our heart and with our minds and with our soul. And James walks us through here in chapter 5. How do we build trust in Christ? How do we do that? And he does that by kind of answering 3 questions. So I want to throw 3 questions out to us this morning and see how we answer those and see how James deals with them. The first question he asks is this: can I trust Christ with things that are out of my control? That's a tough question, isn't it? Because I don't like to give up control, especially when something's got to be figured out. I want to figure it out, right? Most of us guys are like that. We're fix-it guys. But James he's answering this question of, can I trust God with things that are out of my control? Look at verse 7 and 8 here, how he deals with this. He says, be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits on the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains? You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Can I trust God? Can I trust Christ with things that are out of my control? He uses the example of a farmer here. A farmer can do certain things to get ready. You know what he can't do? He can't make it rain. He has to wait on the early rains and the late rains. He has to wait on God to come through to bring the harvest. And you and I, in our lives, sometimes we get in situations and circumstances where things go out of our control. And we say, can I really trust God to come through with the early rains and the late rains? You know what the early rains did? These were, and I'm not a farmer, I just read about this, I'm probably about as good as farming as I would be at building a treehouse. But the early rains is when you plant the seed and the early rains come, it helps the seed take root. And then you know what that seed does for a long time underneath the ground? Stuff we can't see. Stuff's happening. We're looking out and we don't see it. We may see a little sprout coming up, but you know what happens when the late rains comes? All of a sudden, that plant bursts forth, and that's what brings forth the harvest. And in our lives, sometimes we can see the early rains, but we don't know when those later rains are going to come, and we've got to trust God to do that. You know how we typically respond when things go out of our control? There's one big word that we all struggle with. It's called worry, right? We love to worry. We're addicted to worry. We worry about things we can't control. We worry about things that have already happened. We worry about things that might happen that probably won't happen. We just like to worry. And I promise you, I'm worrying enough for all of us right now thinking about moving to New York City. Right? I literally will wake up at nights and go, what, we're moving? Like, as each month ticks away, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's getting closer and closer. I'm trying to think about how we're going to afford things. We're looking at apartments up there, and where we're looking at right it's an expensive place to live. Just to give you an idea, about a 1,300 square foot apartment. Their rents starting at about $4,000 a month. I can buy it if I would prefer for about $1.5 million, 1,300 square feet. And so we're praying. I mean, I wake up in a sweat going, how are we going to do that? And God is already beginning to answer that prayer. We're seeing the early rains. The late rains are when we move in, and we're actually experiencing that in that moment. But I can remember it clear as day. About a month ago, I woke up one night just, like I said, in a cold sweat going, I can't do this. God, we can't do this. It's too much. There's too many things to do. Too many things have to happen. And I was just worry. And as audibly as God can speak to me, God said, you know what, Patrick? You're right. You can't. But I can. And it was like at that moment, he just lifted that worry off of me. And the circumstances, the things that go on in my life, just thinking about this one thing, I was able to let go and let God. What circumstances are in your life right now that's just out of your control? Maybe it's something with a family member, maybe it's a financial situation, maybe it's job, school, college. I don't know what it is, but it's out of your control. Can I challenge you to trade your worry for an incredible characteristic of God that James talks about here? And it's God's faithfulness. God's faithfulness. That he's faithful to bring those early and late rains. He talks about here what the farmer does. The first way that we trade that is to be diligent in obedience. To do what God's already called us to do. Right? We know God's commanded us, take this step, do this, do that. Waiting on God, being patient on God, just waiting for God to come through doesn't mean that we don't do anything. It means that we do what we already know to do. The second thing to do is to wait with patience. How do we trade our worry for his faithfulness? Is wait with patience. Now, most people think waiting with patience is just sitting back, okay, God, whenever. What he's talking about here is actually more of a picture of a waiter waiting on a table. What does a waiter do? They serve, they go about their business, they do their job, knowing that what, at the end of the meal, hopefully what's coming? A tip, right? A payment, a blessing is coming. They're waiting, but they're working as they're waiting. So again, trading our worry for God's faithfulness, be diligent and know what we're doing, be faithful and wait with patience, and then finally, once God does bring those later in, celebrate with God. Celebrate. I was sitting in the Orlando airport Friday afternoon, getting ready to fly home. I've been down there for a few days doing some work, and we've been praying for God to come through with some specific financial needs in our life. We've been waiting. We've been having meetings, doing some things like that. I get a call from a guy I've not talked to maybe in a couple of years. Phone rings, how you doing? Hey, good, Patrick. He said, I need you to text me your address. I'm like, all right, I'll be happy. Usually when you get that, you're getting a birthday, graduation invitation, somebody. And he said, he works in a church. And he says, we had somebody give our church a gift. And that one stipulation of that gift was that we would give it to somebody we know that has some specific needs that money could go help to. I'm like, man, you gotta be kidding me. And so as he just began to talk to, he said, Patrick, I just want you to know, we're sending you a check this week for $10,000. I tell you, I've heard about those phone calls before. Like I've heard that happen, and they would actually happen in my life. I was like, I teared up right now. I said, you got me crying in the Orlando airport right here, just the way you're, and it's almost a dollar amount that we've been praying for. It's to move into an apartment. I know I'm talking about that. You got to pay 1 month's rent, a security deposit, and a broker's fee, which ends up being about 3 months' rent that you got to pay when the day you move in. And so we've been praying that God would provide that amount of money, and that's very close to that. And so it was just blown away to see and to celebrate when we see God do that. Not to go, man, that's something I did, or to get there and go, thank you, God. Is an incredible moment to celebrate God's faithfulness. How are you doing? Are you camped out over here in worry? It's an easy place to pitch your tent. It's an easy place to live your life. I want to challenge you. Take those stakes up from worry and plant them in God's faithfulness. Wait with patience. Do what you know is right to do, and then when God comes through with those later rains, celebrate with God. Later on in James, in verse 13, I love what he says here. He says, if any of you is suffering, let him what? Pray. If anyone is cheerful, let him sing praise. Guess what? If you've got a problem with worry, you know what James says to do? Pray. Pray. Instead of worrying, pray. That's been a new motto of my life. It's don't worry, be happy. It's don't worry, pray. Right? That's what James challenges to do. So first question, can you trust Christ with things that are out of my control? My answer to that is yes. I can trust Christ because all I can do is worry. All he can do is be faithful to who he is. And when he's faithful to who he is, he leads me down the paths of righteousness for his sake. Second question that James asks here and helps us deal with is another huge part of our lives, not just things that are out of our control, but you know what we deal with every day is relationships, right? We deal with people. And he asks this question, can I trust Christ when relationships grow difficult? You ever had a relationship grow difficult? Husband, wife, parent, child, longtime friend, somebody hurt you, you hurt somebody. It happens, right? We all would shake our head in here and say, yes, there are moments in here when my relationships in my life grow difficult, and I like to solve that. Right? I can keep God out of that, but James is saying, hold on. If this Christ is really a Christ we can trust, it's not just in our outward circumstances, but it's also internally how we relate to other people. If I'm really going to trust him, it's going to affect how I connect with people. Here's what he says here in verse 9. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Can I trust Christ when relationships grow difficult? You know what we tend to do when relationships grow difficult? We blame, right? We blame people. Look what you did to me. You need to make that up to me. We like to place blame. And you know the last place we like to place blame is on ourselves. We can always find another person, another reason, something that caused this problem in this relationship, but it certainly wasn't me. Did you catch what James said there? Don't grumble against one another so that you may not be judged, because behold, the judge is standing at the door. When we blame people, do you know what we become? We try to become the judge. And he's saying, guess what, guys? That's never a role you were supposed to play. The judge is standing at the door. You know who that person is? It's God. It's not you or I. We don't get to be the judge in relationships. There's one role that God says that you and I get to play in relationships, and it's that of peacemaker. We get to be a peacemaker. When relationships grow difficult, it says, take my love, take my grace, take my mercy, take my forgiveness that I have poured out on you, and pour that out on others, even if they've done you wrong. Right? Not just love your neighbor as yourself, but what do you do to those that have harmed you? You bless them. Right? There's never in Scripture this picture of us as believers, as followers of Christ, getting to deal out retribution. We would love for that to be in there, wouldn't we? We would love for when somebody hits me to say, it's all right to hit them back. Somebody said something about me, great. God says I get to say something bad about them? It's not there. Instead, he says, be a peacemaker. Allow him to be the judge. And what you and I have to do is we have to trade this blame in for God's righteousness. As we allow God to set things right. That's what God's righteousness means. Is he is right in every situation, and he will set things right. When we try to be righteous, guess what we're working out of? We're working out of our sinfulness, out of our brokenness. And our righteousness is like what to God? Filthy rags. God's righteousness is based on his character, who he is, and it's flowing out of his perfectness. And so when he makes things right, guess what they are? They're right. They're made perfect. So I would much rather him be the judge and then me be the judge because of what it'll do to relationships. When I'm the judge, it doesn't restore. It creates separation, creates bitterness, creates anger and brokenness. So how do we trade this? James tells us here very simply. Note it says, number one, don't grumble against each other. You know what I think of when I hear that word grumble? I think of Oscar the Grouch on Sesame Street. Right? He pops up out of the trash can. Nothing's ever good enough for Oscar the Grouch. He lives on the happiest street in America, right? And he is never happy. I mean, big birds are walking around, and that crazy Snuffleupagus guy that one makes me laugh every time. He's just never happy. Don't grumble. You know some grumblers in your life? You ever been a grumbler? You know what that word actually means? It means to complain at the expense of others. Not just complain about things, but you're actually complaining to try to make others look bad. That's what grumbling is. Boy, that's an easy thing to get caught up in, isn't it? You know, I shouldn't tell you this, but can I tell you what so-and-so did? And you're painting yourself in the best light and the other person in the bad light. So don't grumble. Second thing is this, is remember your own faults. I've done marriage counseling, I've done counseling between parents and teenagers, I've done all kinds of different relational counseling in my years in ministry. And can I tell you what is true about every one of those times that I meet with people? There's fault on both sides. Maybe it's 90%, 10%. Maybe if it's a 99 and 1, but at some point there is fault on both sides. And part of not being the judge is owning the part that you're at fault in and remembering your fault in this relationship and dealing with it. There's a difference between saying, I'm sorry for what I did, and that I'm sorry that what I did hurt you. That's different. It's very different. And I tell people when they're going through difficult times like this, and they say this, I've said I'm sorry 1,000 times. Right? And you can say you're sorry 1,000 times, but there's a difference than saying I'm sorry and I'm saying I'm sorry that what I did hurt you. I'm owning the hurt that I caused you. Remember our faults in relationship, and then finally, refrain from becoming the judge. Don't play that role. Don't pick up the gavel. Don't put on the robe. Don't put yourself up above everybody else and try to be the judge. Allow God to play that role. Trade your blame for his righteousness. In verse 16, he talks about a prayer that helps us with this. And he says this, therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. See what he's saying here? He's saying, admit your faults to one another. Don't judge each other. And you know how you do that? By praying for one another. If you got a problem with blame, don't blame the person. You know what you ought to do for them instead? Pray for that person. Pray. Even when they are the one that's done wrong. Last question very quickly. It's just one quick question that says this. Can you trust God? Not only just in the exterior of your circumstances and in the relationships that you do with one another, but can you actually trust God to be the only source of your truth, of real truth in your life? He says it here in verse 12, but above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. Can you allow God to be the only truth that you swear by? Is Christ enough? Is Christ enough? That's the question. And you know what we confront with this? We confront doubt, don't we? There's times that things happen in our life that doubt just rules our life. And God says, I want you to trade your doubt for something. And what he wants you to trade it for is his worthiness. And he is worthy of our trust. You know what we like to do with this when we doubt? We give up control. And so step one is to take back control. Figure out who you're giving up control of your life to. Sometimes we give up control to other people, to circumstances that cause us to doubt. Take that back. But then you know what you need to do is give up control. Give it up to the right person. We talked about submission way back at the beginning. Submit by trusting Christ. Give up control of your life to Christ. Let him be your yes. Let him be your no. Let him be your only source of truth. Not your finances, not your relationships, not anything else, only him. And then once you give it up to him, you know what you need to do? It's forget about it. Sounds like a good New York saying, right? Forget about it. Forget about the truth. I mean, not the truth. Forget about control. Let him have it. Don't try to take it back. Worthiness. Christ is worthy. I want to end with just this quote that I found that just sums this up. It's by John Henry Newman, who's just a great philosopher and thought, and here's what he says about this. It says, I will trust him. Whatever, wherever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. My sickness, perplexity, or sorrow may be necessary causes of some great end, which is quite beyond me. He does nothing in vain. Can you trust him? Yes. Can this world trust him? Yes. Can your neighbor who does not know Christ trust him? Yes. See, we're not trying to attract people to a religion. We're not trying to attract people to a set of beliefs. We're trying to attract people to a Savior that they can trust with every part of their life. And he'll be faithful, righteous, and worthy to bless them in all that they do. Let's pray together. And as we pray, the band will come back up and we're going to sing a song of response. But we just take a minute in this moment of prayer